Don't you get it?
Not everybody is killing 7 people. So there must have been something in you that was getting you to do that.
Oh, you are lost, Nick!
Some secrets are meant to stay buried, but these killers, they couldn't keep quiet. In this video, we descend into the deepest, darkest depths of human depravity, the most disturbing serial killer confessions, an unfiltered look into the minds of the world's most twisted killers, caught in their own words. As we go down the iceberg, we get into the most disturbing and little-known serial killer confessions you probably never knew existed. Tier 1. Surface level. Popular disturbing cases. Aileen Wuornos' cold-blooded claims.
Nonetheless,
Yeah?
you killed 7 men.
Yes, you
And
did.
I'm asking you, what got you to kill the 7
And
men?
I'm telling you because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't you get it?
October 8th, 2002. Just one day before her execution, Aileen Wuornos sat for her final interview. What unfolded was not just a chaotic exchange, but a raw, unfiltered unraveling of a mind pushed beyond its limits. This was no ordinary death row confession. This was a woman teetering between fury and fatalism, between reality and delusion, and the world was watching. Wuornos, convicted of murdering 7 men between 1989 and 1990, while working as a prostitute, had spent years shifting between justifications. Sometimes she claimed self-defense, insisting that each man had tried to harm her. Other times, she admitted to cold-blooded murder, portraying herself as a woman taking revenge on the predators of the world. But in her final hours, none of those explanations seemed to matter. Wuornos was done playing the role society had written for her. In her mind, she wasn't a monster. She was a soldier in a war only she could see. From the moment the camera started rolling, Wuornos was visibly unraveling. Her eyes darted wildly. Her voice jumped between hoarse whispers and sudden outbursts. She barely allowed filmmaker Nick Broomfield to speak, accusing him, along with the prison guards, the state of Florida, and nearly everyone else, of being part of a grand conspiracy against her. She spat, eyes wide with paranoia that they were using sonic pressure on her head in prison, trying to push her to the breaking point. Broomfield had interviewed Wuornos before and had even developed something close to a rapport with her. But this time, she wasn't just furious at the system, she was furious at him. To her, he was no longer an observer, but a participant in the machinery designed to destroy her. Her accusations spiraled into the bizarre. She claimed the police had known she was killing men, but let her continue so they could cash in on the spectacle. She said Florida had always planned to execute her, that her trial had been a sham from the beginning. And then, as if her mind had flipped a switch, she declared she was ready to die. But she wasn't done yet. In between her rants against the justice system, Wuornos began speaking of the apocalypse. The world, she claimed, was on the brink of destruction. The end times were near, and she was just another casualty of a corrupt system that would soon collapse under its own weight.
I got big finger in all your faces, thanks a lot. You're an inhumane bunch of fucking living bastards and bitches, and you're gonna get your asses nuked in the end, and pretty soon it's coming.
At times, she seemed eerily calm, staring off into space as if watching something no one else could see. Then, without warning, her rage would reignite, her voice cracking as she cursed the very state that had condemned her. As the interview came to an end, Wuornos' final words were both chilling and resigned. She said she'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, and then, just like that, it was over.
We're gonna have to cut this interview, Nick. I'm not going to go into any more detail. I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass.
The next morning, October 9th, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. Her last meal was a simple cup of coffee. She refused a last statement. Her final interview, however, said more than any rehearsed farewell ever could. It was not just the words of a killer. It was the last, desperate broadcast of a mind that had spent a lifetime in the dark, screaming into the void. While her story was chilling, it is nothing compared to the next. Arthur Shawcross.
Right.
Do you have any comprehension of the suffering that you've brought the families of the people that you've killed?
I don't have any remorse, for some reason.
Arthur Shawcross. The Genesee River Killer was a man who left a trail of horror in his wake, preying on the vulnerable with a cold, calculated brutality that defies comprehension. In an interview that remains one of the most disturbing ever recorded, Shawcross put his twisted mind on full display. His demeanor was unsettling from the start. He sat there, calm and relaxed, speaking with an almost casual arrogance. He smirked as he recounted his crimes, as if discussing an old hobby. There was no remorse in his voice, only a grotesque fascination with his own ability to take life. His eyes, dark and lifeless, gave away nothing. No guilt, no regret, just the eerie stillness of a man who saw his victims as nothing more than objects. Shawcross reveled in the attention, treating the interview like his own twisted stage performance. He spoke about his murders as if they were routine, stripping away the horror with his cold descriptions. He described his victims in grotesque detail, speaking about their final moments with a chilling indifference. He wasn't just recounting the facts, he was reliving them, savoring them. But then, a crack in the mask. When the interviewer mentioned his earlier crimes, the murders of a 10-year-old boy and a 22-year-old woman in Watertown, his entire demeanor shifted. His face tightened, his eyes darkened, and his voice grew sharp. It was the only time he showed true emotion. He got angry and showed rage. This was when he gave a stern warning to the interviewer not to bring up Watertown. His tone was different now. No longer the smug storyteller, but an animal backed into a corner. It was clear. Watertown was his breaking point.
But I'm just wondering why you're prepared to talk about it and not Watertown.
I don't want to talk about it. You say one more question, I leave.
He could speak at length about murdering sex workers, about strangulation and mutilation, even about cannibalism. But the children? That was the one thing he couldn't spin into some sick justification. Even in his warped mind, he knew that was beyond defense. Shawcross's interview was not a confession. It was a performance. He didn't speak to seek redemption or to explain himself. He spoke because he loved the attention. Every question fed his ego. Every response was carefully crafted to keep the cameras on him. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't sorry. He was proud. Proud of the terror he caused. Proud of the pain he inflicted. And proud that, for those few moments in front of the camera, he was in control again. But behind that control was something far darker, something truly inhuman. Shawcross wasn't just a killer. He was a predator who had lost all connection to what it meant to be human. And the most terrifying part, he knew it, and he didn't care. But the list gets even more chilling. Ted Bundy's final interview.
Some kind of those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands.
On January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy's reign of terror came to an end when he was executed in Florida's electric chair. But before that final moment, he sat down for one last interview, a conversation that remains as unsettling today as it was then. Bundy had spent years speaking with journalists, law enforcement, and psychologists, each time offering carefully crafted glimpses into his twisted mind. He spoke with FBI profiler Robert Ressler, whose work helped define what we now know as criminal profiling. He also gave extensive interviews to journalists Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, who recorded hours of audio that later became the book Ted Bundy, Conversations with a Killer. But it was his final interview with Dr. James Dobson, just hours before his execution, that has drawn the most controversy. By the time Bundy sat down with Dobson, he had little left to lose, yet he remained as manipulative as ever. Throughout the interview, he carefully framed himself not as a monster, but as a victim of a corrupting influence, pornography.
It had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
He claimed that violent pornography had fueled his darkest desires, warping his mind from an early age and leading him down the path to murder. In his own words, Bundy warned that pornography can reach in and snatch a kid out of any house today. He claimed it snatched him out of his home at a young age. To some, this was a desperate attempt to shift blame in his final moments, a last-ditch effort to control the narrative before his death. Many psychologists and criminologists dismissed his claims outright. Bundy had spent years lying, manipulating, and evading responsibility. Why should this be any different? Studies have shown that millions consume pornography without turning into violent criminals, making his assertion feel more like an excuse than a confession.
Because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain.
As the interview continued, Bundy described his crimes in vague, detached terms, often avoiding direct acknowledgement of what he had done. When asked if he felt remorse, his response was chilling, saying he didn't feel guilty for anything. For all his supposed self-reflection, Bundy never truly accepted responsibility for his actions. Instead, he continued to paint himself as a tragic figure, someone who had been led astray by external forces. He even expressed concern for his own soul, telling Dobson he had rediscovered Christianity in prison and hoped for forgiveness. His case is nothing compared to the next entry, Jeffrey Dahmer's cannibal admissions.
And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls.
Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were some of the most horrifying in modern history. Between 1978 and 1991, he murdered 17 young men and boys, committing acts of necrophilia, cannibalism, and dismemberment. When he was finally caught in 1991, police found severed heads in his fridge, human remains in acid-filled barrels, and Polaroid pictures of his victims' bodies. The world was horrified, but what was even more disturbing, the way he talked about it, completely calm, as if he was describing a normal day. In a chilling 1993 interview with Nancy Glass on Inside Edition, Dahmer openly admitted to his crimes. He explained how he wanted total control over his victims, treating them like objects instead of people. He even described his failed attempts to create zombies by drilling holes into his victims' skulls and injecting chemicals like acid or boiling water to keep them alive, but fully under his command. His voice never wavered. His face remained emotionless. It was this eerie calmness that made his confessions even more disturbing. Dahmer didn't shy away from any detail. He explained that once his victims were dead, he dismembered them, kept some of their body parts as trophies, and even ate human flesh.
Eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
He admitted to doing these things with a chilling matter-of-fact tone, as if it were routine. His lack of guilt or remorse was shocking, even to seasoned interviewers and criminal experts. His words have since been studied by criminologists and psychologists, trying to understand what drives a person to such extreme brutality. But no explanation can erase the horror of what he did, or how casually he spoke about it. Bernard Giles.
For me, this was my life's passion up to that point.
To do what?
To murder women.
In 1975, Bernard Giles took his first step into the abyss, acting on the dark urges that had haunted him since childhood. His method was disturbingly simple. Pick up young women hitchhiking, lure them into a false sense of security, then take them to a secluded location where he would rape and murder them. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, only the raw, unfiltered need to dominate and destroy. When journalist Piers Morgan sat down with Giles for an interview decades later, the world got a glimpse into the mind of a remorseless predator. Morgan, known for his blunt questioning, asked a seemingly simple question to determine if Giles remembered the names of any of the women he killed. Giles, without missing a beat, dismissed the question with chilling indifference, asking why he would. It was in that moment that the sheer lack of humanity in his voice sent a wave of unease through anyone listening. These women were nothing more than objects, disposable, interchangeable, forgotten.
Remember the names of any of the victims?
No, sir.
None at all?
No.
They meant nothing to you?
Why would I do that?
Giles was not the product of an abusive household. He was not neglected, nor was he raised in a cycle of violence. In fact, he had a relatively normal upbringing, which only deepens the horror of his actions. His violent desires weren't born from trauma. They were ingrained within him, festering in his mind like a cancer. By his own admission, these urges began when he was just 6 years old. He recalled a childhood game in which he straddled and strangled a female friend, not out of anger, but because he enjoyed the power it gave him. While most children grow out of such phases, Giles never did. Instead, these early fantasies evolved into an obsession. He called it his life's passion, not a fleeting compulsion, but an unshakable drive that consumed him completely. Giles's crimes were not acts of desperation or uncontrolled rage. They were planned with precision. He would seek out young women who were alone, drive them to isolated areas, and commit acts of unspeakable brutality before disposing of their bodies. Unlike many serial killers, he felt no attachment to his victims, not even as trophies or symbols of conquest. He simply erased them from existence, both physically and mentally. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Giles's story is the way he compartmentalized his monstrous actions. At the time of his killing spree, he was a married man with a young daughter. He led what appeared to be an ordinary life, interacting with co-workers, neighbors, and family as if nothing was wrong. Yet, when the urges surfaced, he would slip into his role as a predator without hesitation. He never targeted women he knew, reinforcing the chilling idea that to him, these murders were a task, something separate from his personal life, like a hobby one indulges in on the weekends. Unlike many killers who fabricate justifications or express regret once behind bars, Giles made no such attempts. He never claimed insanity. He never blamed his past. He never sought pity. When confronted about his crimes, he spoke with a cold, clinical detachment, as if he were discussing an impersonal event from years ago, something irrelevant, something forgotten.
I saw these women as objects.
And perhaps that is the most terrifying truth about Bernard Giles. He did not kill out of rage, revenge, or necessity. He killed because he wanted to, because he enjoyed it, because in his own words, it felt right. This takes us to a deeper depth of horror. Tier 2, mid-level, lesser known, darkly unsettling. Dennis Rader's BTK tapes.
And I took her to the basement and eventually hung her.
You hung her in the basement?
Yes, sir.
Did you do anything else at that time?
Yes, I...
In 2005, Dennis Rader, infamously known as the BTK, which is an acronym that means bind, torture, and kill, stood in a Wichita, Kansas courtroom and delivered a chilling confession that left many both horrified and shocked. Over the span of 3 decades, Rader had terrorized the community with a series of brutal murders, and his courtroom demeanor during his confession added another layer of disturbance to his already heinous crimes. Rader's confession was not the tearful admission of guilt one might expect from someone facing the gravity of his actions. Instead, he recounted each of his 10 murders with a detached, almost clinical precision. He described how he meticulously planned each crime, selecting his victims, stalking them, and ultimately carrying out the gruesome acts of binding, torturing, and killing. His tone was devoid of remorse, and at times, he seemed to take a perverse pride in the details of his crimes. What made Rader's confession particularly unsettling was his apparent arrogance. He spoke as if he were narrating a twisted memoir, providing insights into his methods and mindset. This smugness was evident as he detailed how he eluded capture for so long, taunting law enforcement with letters and clues. He even had what he called hit clothes, which were like his serial killer work clothes. His ability to lead a double life, a devoted family man and church leader by day, and a sadistic killer by night, only added to the horror of his narrative. The Wichita community, which had lived in fear during Rader's killing spree from 1974 to 1991, was left reeling by his confession. Many struggled to reconcile the image of the seemingly upstanding citizen with the monstrous acts he described. The courtroom was filled with victims' families, law enforcement officers, and members of the public, all grappling with a mix of emotions, anger, sorrow, and disbelief. He talked about his mistakes that got him caught, and it was clear that this was a man that wished to continue killing. Rader's demeanor during his confession has since been the subject of extensive analysis by psychologists and criminologists. His lack of empathy and apparent satisfaction in recounting his crimes suggest a deep-seated psychopathy. Albert Fish's Letter to Grace. The tale of Albert Fish is one that chills the bones and unsettles the mind. Born on May 19, 1870, in Washington, D.C., Fish would grow up to become one of America's most notorious serial killers, earning monikers like the Gray Man and the Brooklyn Vampire. His crimes, particularly against children, were as heinous as they were unfathomable. In 1928, Fish responded to a classified advertisement placed by the Budd family in New York City. Under the guise of Frank Howard, a prospective employer, he visited their home with the intention of hiring their son, Edward. However, upon meeting 10-year-old Grace Budd, his sinister intentions shifted. Convincing her parents to let Grace accompany him to a fictitious niece's birthday party, Fish instead took her to an abandoned house in East Irvington, New York, where he committed unspeakable acts. For 6 agonizing years, the Budd family had no knowledge of their daughter's fate. Then, in November 1934, they received an anonymous letter that would shatter any remaining hope. The letter, penned by Fish himself, graphically detailed how he had lured Grace, murdered her, and subsequently consumed parts of her body. The sheer depravity of the letter not only served as a cruel confession, but also as a sadistic taunt to grieving parents. This letter became the key to Fish's capture. Investigators traced the unique stationery to a local association for private chauffeurs. This clue led them to a rooming house where Fish had recently stayed. On December 13th, 1934, he was apprehended and readily confessed to the murder of Grace Budd, among others. Fish's trial commenced on March 11th, 1935. Despite his plea of insanity, citing auditory hallucinations and a history of extreme sexual fetishes, the jury found him sane and guilty. He was sentenced to death and was executed by electric chair on January 16, 1936. Tommy Lynn Sells.
You could from getting...
It did not matter. Blood is blood. It didn't matter man, woman, child.
No more thrill to kill the mayor of the town than the homeless guy on the street.
No. If I could have got George Bush to...
In 2001, ABC sat face-to-face with one of the most cold-blooded serial killers in American history, Tommy Lynn Sells. A man who didn't just kill, but seemed to savor every moment of pain and suffering he inflicted. This interview wasn't just about his crimes. It was a chilling look into the mind of a remorseless predator, a man who slaughtered with the same ease that others take a breath. For over 2 decades, Sells drifted across the United States, leaving a blood-soaked trail of victims. Authorities estimate he may have murdered as many as 70 people, though the true number will never be known. He didn't have a type. He didn't need one. Women, men, children, the elderly. It made no difference to him. If they bled, they were enough. Some he tortured for hours, playing God with their suffering. Others he dispatched in an instant, as if swatting a fly. But one thing remained the same. He enjoyed every second of it. What made Tommy Lynn Sells particularly terrifying wasn't just the number of bodies he left behind. It was his complete and utter lack of empathy.
I did it for the rush. I didn't do it for the sex. Didn't do it for the power. Didn't do it for the motive.
He spoke about his murders the way most people discuss their daily routines. When the interviewer asked why he didn't at least kill his victims quickly, to spare them unnecessary agony, Sells looked genuinely confused. The thought had never even crossed his mind. Why would it? Pain was part of the experience. In a moment that still haunts those who have seen the footage, he smirked, tilted his head slightly and asked, would that have made it better? His tone wasn't sarcastic or defensive. It was curious. The way a child might ask if putting more sugar in their cereal would make it taste better. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't regretful. He was simply amused.
It's a sensation, tying that scarf around your neck and just watching your eyes. It's a sensation seeing that skin pull apart.
Sells wasn't just a killer. He was a sadist. He admitted that he didn't kill for revenge, for money, or even for necessity. He killed because he liked it. Michael Bruce Ross. When Michael Bruce Ross sat down for an interview in 2005, what emerged was not just an admission of guilt, but a chilling display of something far worse, an absence of anything remotely human. His voice carried no weight of remorse, no hesitation, no sign that he understood the enormity of his crimes. Instead, he spoke with eerie detachment, as if he were reciting mundane details of a past job rather than recounting the brutal murders of 8 young women. His demeanor alone was disturbing. Ross did not slouch in shame or fidget with nerves. He sat upright, composed, his eyes reflecting a hollow emptiness. And yet, when he spoke about his murders, his face would momentarily light up, not with regret, but with something closer to amusement. At one point, he chuckled when recalling a forensic examiner's remark about his extraordinary grip strength. The doctor had never seen anything like it. Ross relished the compliment. He savored the validation. It was as if he saw himself not as a killer, but as a craftsman perfecting his technique. Ross, known as the roadside strangler, didn't just kill, he hunted. He preyed on young women who were alone, vulnerable, unsuspecting. He lured them in with kindness, a helpful offer, a gentle smile. Then, once they were in his grasp, that kindness dissolved into pure, controlled savagery. But what's truly sickening is how little these 8 lives seemed to mean to him. 8 was just a number. He dismissed it. He spoke as if he wished he had killed more, as if his body count was unimpressive in the world of serial murder. In fact, there were times when he claimed to have killed up to 100 women. Was it true? Most likely not. But the lie itself speaks volumes. It reveals an insatiable hunger for recognition, for fear, for a legacy of horror. To Ross, it was not about the lives he destroyed, but about the size of his shadow. But the iceberg gets even colder and darker. Tier 3, deeper level, obscure, hauntingly strange. Robert Picton's pig farm regrets.
He had lured women from Vancouver's downtown east side to his pig farm and was charged with killing 26 women.
In Canadian criminal history, few names evoke as much horror as Robert Picton's. A pig farmer from Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Picton was convicted in 2007 for the murders of 6 women, though evidence suggested he was responsible for many more. His farm became the epicenter of one of the country's most gruesome crime investigations, revealing a chilling narrative of violence and depravity. In 2002, following his arrest, Picton was placed in a cell with an undercover officer posing as a fellow inmate. Unaware of the ruse, Picton made several disturbing admissions. He boasted about his crimes, lamenting that he had been caught before reaching a personal milestone. He said he was going to do one more to make it an even 50, he confided to his cellmate. The undercover operation also shed light on Picton's methods. He spoke of his interactions with the victims, many of whom were vulnerable women from Vancouver's downtown east side. The investigation revealed that he would lure them to his farm with promises of money or drugs, only to subject them to unimaginable horrors. Disturbingly, there were indications that he disposed of some victims by feeding them to his pigs. Carl Panzram's hate-filled manuscript, No Remorse. Carl Panzram's 1928 confession is one of the op des cases of a serial killer going viral. Born in 1891, Panzram's early years were marred by abuse and neglect, setting the stage for his descent into criminality. By the time he penned his confession, he had already amassed a staggering list of crimes, including 21 murders and over 1,000 instances of sexual assault against males. His declaration that he hated the whole damn human race encapsulates the depth of his disdain for humanity. In his 20,000-word manuscript, Panzram detailed his gruesome exploits with unflinching honesty. He recounted his global crime spree, which spanned multiple continents and left a trail of victims in its wake. What is perhaps most disturbing is his complete lack of remorse. Pansaram openly admitted to deriving pleasure from the suffering of others, viewing his actions as a form of retribution against a world he believed had wronged him. Pansaram's writings also offer a scathing critique of the criminal justice system. He argued that the brutality he experienced in various institutions only served to fuel his rage and reinforce his criminal tendencies. This perspective raises unsettling questions about the role of systemic abuse in perpetuating cycles of violence. His execution on September 5, 1930, did little to quell the horror of his legacy. Even in his final moments, Pansaram remained defiant, reportedly telling his executioner to hurry it up. Wesley Allen Dodd.
Why do you want to be executed?
I have to be. Because I will kill again. No, I would do it again.
Wesley Allen Dodd was a walking nightmare, and when he sat down for an interview before his execution on January 5, 1993, at Washington State Penitentiary, what came out of his mouth was pure, unfiltered evil. In the interview, Dodd confesses that it's been that way since he was 13, back when most kids are figuring out bikes or baseball. For Dodd, it was murder fantasies, day in, day out, for over half his life. Now, let's rewind a bit to how they nabbed this creep. November 13th, 1989 in Vancouver, Washington, Dodd finally got captured when he was prowling a movie theater, eyeing a 6-year-old boy like a vulture circling a carcass. He's got plans, sick, twisted plans, to snatch that kid, do God knows what, and probably leave another tiny body in his wake. But this time, he slips up. Someone spots him, and the cops swoop in. When they dig into his past, it's a horror show. 3 little boys, Cole Neer, William Neer, and Lee Iselli, raped, tortured, and murdered by Dodd. And that's just what he admits to. They find his apartment, and it's like stepping into a serial killer's trophy room. There's a diary filled with pages of his disgusting thoughts, spelling out every cut, every scream, every sick thing he did or wanted to do. Back to the interview, Dodds is sitting there, smirking maybe, and says he's molested at least 175 kids over 15 years. He says if he ever gets out, and he's dead serious here, he's got unfinished business. There's this one guy he's itching to kill, some mystery man he won't name. Here's where it gets wilder.
Dodd also says that if he ever escapes from prison, there is someone in particular that he will be out to kill.
I'm not gonna...
Dodd's not begging for mercy or crying for forgiveness. Nope. He's practically daring them to execute him. He pleads guilty to everything. 3 murders, the kidnapping attempt, all of it. And then says the authorities bead, you put him down fast. January 5th, 1993. Wesley Allen Dodd was finally executed. Samuel Little.
I got away with numerous murders of women in my life over a span of 50 years.
On November 9th, 2018, after years of playing the innocent card, Samuel Little finally starts spilling the gruesome truth about his crimes. He's sitting with investigators, and what he says isn't just a confession. It's a full-blown horror show, delivered with a sick kind of excitement that'll turn your stomach. Samuel Little's parked in front of a camera, unloading his twisted tale like he's the star of some demented movie. You can see it in his face. He's into this. He's animated, practically buzzing, as he describes hunting down his victims, snatching them up like they were nothing. He compares it to picking fruit, casual as can be, like he's bragging about a good day at the orchard.
Never reached subsequent employers, and Cullen continued to murder patients with virtually impunity. In 1993, prosecutors investigated Cullen for murder.
Except he's talking about ending lives, real people, innocent women. And he's got this vibe like he expects a pat on the back. His tone's light, relaxed, the kind you'd hear from a guy chatting about last night's game over ribs and a cold one. It's jarring, beyond messed up, watching someone revel in murder like it's no big deal. Let's rewind and lay out who this guy was. Little didn't just dabble in crime. He was a pro at it, stretching his reign of terror across 5 decades, 1960s to the 2000s. His record's a mess of ugly, burglary, assault, rape, the works. Cops grabbed him over 100 times, 100 arrests, and still, they never pieced together the trail of bodies he left behind. He'd drift into a town, wreak havoc, and vanish before anyone connected the dots. It's infuriating how he kept slipping through. Here's where it gets downright grim. Little had a target. Women on the fringes, sex workers, drug addicts, the overlooked. He'd lock eyes on them, cold and calculating, and move in. No weapons, just his bare hands. He'd choke them out, watch the life fade, then toss them aside like garbage. In that interview, he's practically giddy, claiming 93 kills, though some say it's over 100. He died in prison on October 30th, 2019, locked up with 3 life sentences. This leads us to a dreadful depth of our list. Tier 4. Abyssal level, rare, bone-chilling oddities. Andrei Chikatilo's Red Ripper rant.
Here you can see drastic change during the trial. He tries to look as insane as possible. Even his psychological profile said
On February 14th, 1994, Andrei Chikatilo faced a firing squad, a brutal end to a reign of terror that left 53 women and children dead, raped, mutilated, and murdered between 1978 and 1990. They say the roots of this guy's evil go back to his childhood, and he sure leaned hard into that excuse during his interviews. Born in Ukraine in the 1930s, he grew up in a world torn apart by famine. Starvation so bad, it turned neighbors into predators. His mum fed him this story about his older brother, snatched away and eaten by desperate locals. True or not, it stuck with him, burrowing deep into his head. He'd bring it up later, almost like he wanted sympathy, like that could explain why he turned into a flesh-ripping lunatic. Chikatilo wasn't just a killer, he was a butcher. He'd slash at his victims with a knife, stabbing over and over until they were a mess of blood and guts. Sometimes he'd strangle them, hands tightening until their last breath was gone. And when he didn't have a blade handy, he'd go primal, teeth sinking into their skin, biting, tearing, ripping chunks away like a wild dog. Kids, young women, it didn't matter. He'd lure them in, trap them, and unleash hell. Here's the kicker. This soulless creep was a teacher. Yeah, a school teacher, surrounded by kids every day. He worked at several schools. And get this, he didn't just teach, he prayed, molested girls right under everyone's noses, abusing his power without a shred of shame. And the people who should have stopped him? Fellow teachers, principals, they knew. They saw the signs, the complaints, and instead of calling the cops, they let him slink away. A quiet resignation here, a transfer there, and he was free to keep hunting. It's sickening. Makes you wonder how many lives could have been saved if someone, anyone, had spoken up. By the time they caught him in 1990, the body count was staggering. 53 confirmed, though some think it's higher. Women, children, all carved up and discarded like trash. Pedro Lopez, monster of the Andes boast. Born on October 8, 1948, in Colombia. Pedro Lopez's early life was marred by hardship and violence. His father, a member of the Colombian Conservative Party, was killed 6 months before Pedro's birth during the civil unrest known as La Violencia. Raised by his mother, a reported prostitute, Lopez faced a tumultuous childhood. At 8, after being caught fondling his younger sister, he was expelled from the family home, leading him into a life on the streets where he endured further abuse. Lopez's criminal trajectory escalated alarmingly. By the 1970s, he claimed to have raped and murdered over 300 young girls across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. This staggering figure, though unverifiable in its entirety, is partially corroborated by the discovery of 53 victims in Ecuador, unearthed following his confessions. Such numbers, delivered with chilling detachment, challenge our comprehension of human depravity. Lopez's modus operandi was as calculated as it was monstrous. He would lure young girls, often from indigenous tribes, with trinkets, leading them to secluded areas where he committed his heinous acts. In 1980, a failed abduction in Ambato, Ecuador, led to Lopez's capture. Initially silent, he eventually confessed to the murders, guiding authorities to the burial sites of his victims. His confessions, marked by a disturbing lack of remorse, offered a rare glimpse into the psyche of a serial killer operating with impunity across national borders. Despite the gravity of his crimes, Lopez's sentencing was shockingly lenient. Convicted in Ecuador, he received the maximum sentence of 16 years, but was released 2 years early for good behavior in 1994. Joe Metheny burger stand secret, human blend. Joe Metheny was a serial killer from Baltimore, Maryland, active during the 1990s. Standing at 6 feet 1 inch and weighing between 400 and 500 pounds, he was ironically nicknamed Tiny. Metheny's gruesome acts have etched his name into the annals of infamy. In a chilling confession, Metheny claimed to have mixed the flesh of his victims with pork and beef, creating hamburger patties. He then sold these patties to unsuspecting customers from a roadside burger stand he operated. According to Metheny, human flesh tastes very similar to pork, and when mixed together, no one could tell the difference. Metheny's killing spree began in 1994 with the murder of Kathy Ann Magaziner, a 39-year-old woman whom he buried near his place of employment. His victims were often vulnerable individuals, including homeless people and sex workers. He lured them with promises of drugs or shelter before committing his heinous acts. In 1996, Metheny abducted Rita Kemper with the intent to assault and kill her. Fortunately, she managed to escape and alerted the authorities, leading to Metheny's arrest. Upon his capture, Metheny confessed to multiple murders and the macabre practice of incorporating human flesh into his burger patties. Finally, we get to the darkest depth of our list. Tier 5. Bottom of the iceberg. Almost mythic, utterly disturbing. Javed Iqbal's acid vat diary. 100 boys dissolved.
मैंने अपने वालिदैन को कत्ल नहीं किया, मुझे ट्रैप किया गया है, इस अब्बास ने मुझे ब्लैकमेल कर फंसाया है।
In 1999, Javed Iqbal confessed to murdering 100 boys in Lahore, Pakistan. What makes this case even more disturbing is how methodical and remorseless he was. He didn't just kill. He documented everything in a diary, took photographs, and even wrote a letter to the police and newspapers, almost as if he wanted recognition for his crimes. In late 1999, Iqbal shocked the nation when he sent a letter to authorities, claiming he had murdered 100 boys aged between 6 and 16. He described in detail how he lured them in, strangled them, and then dissolved their bodies in acid to leave no trace. To prove his claims, he led the police to his apartment, where they found bloodstains, victim photos, and plastic barrels filled with acid residue. While Javed Iqbal was in police custody, journalists and investigators tried to understand his mind. The most disturbing interview came when he sat calmly, explaining his crimes without remorse. He spoke about his methods with a chilling detachment, as if he were discussing an ordinary task. His trial moved quickly, and in March 2000, he was sentenced to death in a fittingly gruesome way. The judge ordered that he be strangled to death with the same chains he used on his victims, and his body be dissolved in acid, just as he had done to those 100 boys. However, before the sentence could be carried out, Iqbal was found dead in his prison cell in October 2001. Officials claimed it was suicide, but many believe he was killed to prevent further scandal. David Parker Ray's Toy Box Tapes torture blueprint.
I get my excitement from making a woman happy.
David Parker Ray, infamously dubbed the Toy Box Killer, orchestrated a chilling operation in the 1990s that left an indelible mark on criminal history. Residing in the quiet town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, Ray transformed a soundproofed cargo trailer into a personal torture chamber, ominously referred to as his toy box. This macabre space was meticulously equipped with instruments designed for sexual torture, reflecting a deeply disturbed psyche. Central to Ray's methodical cruelty was an audio tape he recorded in 1993. This tape served as a prelude to the horrors his captives would endure, laying out in explicit detail the torment awaiting them. Imagine the terror of regaining consciousness, only to be greeted by a voice coldly outlining the systematic abuse planned for you. Such calculated psychological manipulation underscores the depth of Ray's sadism. The contents of this tape are profoundly disturbing. Ray describes himself as a dungeon master affiliated with the Church of Satan, suggesting that his victims would be subjected to repeated assaults, not just by him, but by others in his supposed congregation. This tactic was designed to instill utter hopelessness, making his victims believe they were ensnared in a widespread network of tormentors. Anatoly Onoprienko's Terminator mission.
In 19 videotapes of testimony, he betrays no remorse as he describes wiping out whole families to steal a few trinkets.
In the mid-1990s, Ukraine was gripped by a series of brutal murders that left communities in fear and authorities scrambling for answers. The man behind these heinous acts was Anatoly Onoprienko, ominously nicknamed the Terminator and the Beast of Ukraine. His chilling confessions and demeanor during interviews have since become a haunting testament to the depths of human depravity. Between 1989 and 1996, he claimed the lives of 52 individuals, often annihilating entire families without remorse. His modus operandi involved selecting isolated homes, eliminating all occupants methodically, and setting the properties ablaze to destroy evidence. In a rare interview conducted in March 1999, Onoprienko provided a disturbing glimpse into his psyche. He described his murders as experiments, likening his feelings during the acts to that of a doctor performing surgery, detached and clinical. He chillingly stated, "When I kill, it is nothing more than an experiment." This lack of empathy extended to his perception of victims, whom he viewed as mere objects, comparable to the cars they drove. Perhaps more unsettling was his assertion of being driven by external forces. Onoprienko claimed he was programmed by a higher force to kill, suggesting that inner voices compelled his actions. He expressed a sense of inevitability about his crimes, indicating that resistance was futile against these overpowering commands.